Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Tablas Creek semi-weekly Instagram live broadcast back on Wednesday, as it usually was before things got all scrambled up during harvest. I am Jason Haas, as always. My guest this week is super cool. It's Melissa Saunders, who's a master of wine and a wine importer, mostly European wines, who has been one of the most active and eloquent advocates for the necessity of alternative packaging and of making and selling wine in an eco-conscious way. So I'm going to ask Melissa to join me. She's going to be joining from New York. But as I always do, while we're waiting for people to join, I thought I'd share a few pictures of what's going on at the winery. So the big news for us, and the reason why I'm inside right now, is that it is starting to rain. We're getting our first rain of the season. I took this morning as the storm was rolling in. You can see the kind of wintry look and the deeper clouds. A couple other pictures that give you a sense of what the landscape looks like right now. Looking over our compost pile, this is a lot of what we're doing out there. We're trying to get a last load of compost out onto the vines before it starts to rain, so the rain can help wash it in. Here is the ripe compost that is being loaded into a spreader. We are also enjoying the fact that it is lambing season. We have our first lambs of the year, which is always really fun. These guys are starting to get out of the first few vineyard blocks. We'll have them out into the vineyard in a serious way in the next few weeks. We are also trying to prep for the things we'll need for winter. So this is a picture I took yesterday where we are laying down seed. So you can see the lines of the cedar in here from one of our head train. This is our senso block in the middle of the vineyard. And then we are laying straw out on the vineyard roads to keep erosion to a minimum before the cover crops are established and before everything is held in place. We are also in the cellar doing a lot of the end of harvest stuff. So that means we are pressing off lots. This is a Mourvedre lot that I got yesterday. The color looks just amazing. We're digging out tanks. Basically at this point, every fermentation that comes out of a tank is the last one, at least for the year. So we are at the point now where we're not refilling. Our harvest chalkboard, I wrote a harvest blog yesterday. If you want the detailed take home as to what the harvest was like, it's there. But the quick TLDR of this is that quality looks amazing. We were fortunate in that the weather turned warm in October and we were able to get everything in. The quantity is about average in terms of long term, which feels a little bit like a windfall compared to last year, but it's not large historically. Our total average of producing acres was a little over 3 tons per acre. So that's the big news here, is that harvest is done. It's safely in the barn. We are ready to get on with our winter activities. The one thing that we have a little bit left of still going on, like fruit that's not yet in the cellar, is we have a little bit of Roussan drying on straw in one of our greenhouses. And this is not to make Vin de Paille. We're not going to be concentrating this all the way to sweet wine levels, but it will allow us to just get a little extra concentration, a little extra sugar, while also concentrating the acids, which is good. You leave stuff out. Certainly in the rain, bad things happen, and even at this time of year, nothing much good. There's not enough daylight to really get a lot of ripening. So we're really happy with the quality of the harvest, and the quantity is better than recent years, so we'll take it. Okay, I saw that Melissa has joined, and I am going to just as smoothly as it did when we tested it yesterday. If not, I have a couple other ways of getting about this. So great. There we go. Hello, Melissa.
Hi, Jason. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are things in New York?
They're going. And I'll have to apologize in advance. I have like a zoo here, and so if you hear animals meowing or barking, there's not a whole lot I can do.
Awesome. Yes, I have a dog lying at my feet, so it's entirely possible that we'll hear from her as well.
Cool.
Excellent. So I'd love to start just by asking, like, was wine something you knew you wanted to do early on? Was it on your family table growing up, or did you come to it later?
So I definitely came to it later in a true wine appreciation sense. There was wine on my table growing up, but for the most part, it was like Suave Bola. So, grew up in the, 70s and 80s mostly. So that was the order of the day. But it actually was when I did a study abroad program in Italy when I was in undergrad. And that was my first foray into really understanding what wine could be, and where I really kind of caught the wine bug.
Did you have a wine that was sort of your aha wine that you're like, oh man, I get it?
I mean, I had a lot of wine when I was in Italy. I would say it was, probably the wines from Piemonte that most dazzled me. But, in terms of really wanting to dig into wine and understanding what it was all about, that came a little bit later when I started to study wine when I was back in New York. And for me, it's, wine with any wine, any good wine with age, it's like, that's where magic happens. So I think that was it for me, tasting groups and such, but that was later.
Right. So, I mean, you have a degree in English literature, you have a law degree. Can you sort of talk about your path, not just into being interested in wine as a beverage, but into the business?
Sure. There are definitely some dots to connect. So it definitely took me a little while to find my path. Hence studying, literature, more fine arts background initially. It was Italy that got me to law school because after my undergraduate, I actually moved to Italy to live and work. I taught English and had a number of odd jobs. I kind of thought that was my calling, but after a few years realized I was a little too ambitious to be, kind of living that life. And so I took the LSATs in Rome and got into law school in New York, and that's what brought me back to New York. Law school was really a gap filler for me, which is kind of a strange thing to say, but it was. And through my law background and the love of wine that I cultivated when I was in Italy, it led me to working at an alcohol beverage focused law practice in New York. I was taking WSET classes at the time and, just thought, okay, well, this makes sense. Because really, as much as we love the wine aspect of the wine business, it still is a business.
Yes.
First and foremost. And not only that, but, compliance is just at the heart of so much of what we do. So going that route, as much as it wasn't necessarily following my passion, it was really a useful way to cut my teeth and really learn a lot about the business.
Yeah, for sure. And I think people romanticize every piece of the kind of wine trade, whether that's the making of the wine. People think it's all like sitting with your feet up on the patio, enjoying a glass, watching the grapes just magically make themselves, to the distribution, import and distribution side, to the restaurant side. Like everybody, I think, romanticizes it and doesn't realize the challenges that come with all of that.
I think you're right about that. And yeah, it was, and it's funny because after deciding I didn't want to do law anymore and then going into the, into the actual business full time, I really didn't realize how much, I thought, oh, well, this is kind of, frustrating and challenging from a business perspective because I'm handling the compliance because I'm not actually, in the vines, but I quickly have come to learn that it's a lot of work regardless, and it's not all as romanticized as people think, for sure.
So can you talk about your decision to start your import company, Communal Brands, in, I think it was 2009? Is that,
In
do I have the right?
2009. Yeah. So, wow, every story is long, but I'll truncate. So while I was practicing law, I was actually moonlighting as an importer on the side. My brother-in-law at the time, it was a winemaker in New Zealand. And, I just was wanting to be involved in the trade side of the business. And so I dipped my toe in working through a clearing importer and was importing, a small quantity of his wine into the US and selling it to mostly to high-end restaurants, actually, in New York City. And this was like in the mid 2000s. And I really enjoyed that side of the business. I knew that I didn't want to be in retail because I didn't want to just like be in a shop every day, and I wanted to sell cases, not bottles. So that was kind of how I started to understand the importing side of the business. And I really I took to it. And after realizing that I didn't want to pursue the legal career long term and kind of had gotten what I needed out of that, I decided to start Communal and just go both feet in.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about how you choose producers to work with for your portfolio?
Sure. At this point, it's purely relationship driven, because I've been doing this for long enough that it's kind of a web of people. And at least for me, as I understand what it is that I'm looking to add to the portfolio, I have an idea of what I want and where it might come from. And then it's a few conversations. And to be honest, it's always been that way. My first wine that I started importing was a wine from New Zealand because of the personal connections that I had. This was like not even my brother-in-law's wine. This was another producer, just because there's 1 degree of separation in New Zealand. So yeah, and then from New Zealand, I moved over to Italy because that was really where I had some early days connections, and am fluent in Italian. And so that was kind of a logical progression, but always through a relationship. And that's one of the things that I really love the most about the business is the relationships. And the people that I work with are like family, really. And that's something that I'm always looking to foster. It's a growing family always. But yeah, so that's kind of it. And in terms of like, the ethos of the company is pretty strong, I think, and just gotten stronger over time in terms of our approach to being as eco-conscious as we possibly can. But that's always been at the heart of the conversation with anyone that we've been having. And I mean, I don't know, like I live my life in an eco-conscious manner. And so I find that even just in terms of like producers and people being attracted to you or you being attracted to them, it's kind of been a natural thing because of, where I'm at in my life, if that makes sense. So we find each other.
And
we have a shared values.
And how well formed was this idea that you wanted to focus on kind of eco-conscious brands when you started?
So the farming was really how that's always like the first step, right? So in terms of how I was thinking about what would be a good fit, it was always behaving in an as environmentally responsible way as possible, really looking at the vines first. And then you look at practices in the cellar and whatnot. Things have really evolved over the years too, even in terms of like what's acceptable behavior and like what new developments and things like that. But it always started in the vines. It wasn't until a little bit later that I started to actually explore the packaging side of things. And that was just kind of by accident. I mean, once you start to dig into you know, how you can behave as responsibly as possible, you start to peel away layers and you start to realize, oh, like there's this and there's this. I mean, it's kind of never ending. And it was through this process of exploration that was partly prompted by MW study, which is like another like I guess like branch in the tree, you know, that I started to see the impact of the packaging and what a large the magnitude of the packaging on the overall, you know, carbon footprint and waste creation aspect of wine, that I said, wow, this is like something that is shocking actually, that we're not even like talking about this. And that's kind of what started it all. And this was like probably around 2014, 2015. And then it was in 2016 that I started producing box wine myself. Sorry, I'm like really awkward. That's because my phone is plugged in. Otherwise, wouldn't be a good situation.
So that's really early. I mean, I think all of us who have been looking at wine packaging, there's something that we've read or something that we saw at some point that was like, I cannot believe that on average, the glass bottle accounts for half of the carbon footprint of wine, more or less. I mean, obviously it varies a lot depending on where it's coming from and where it's going and how far you have to ship it and all of that. But that's a pretty good general rule.
Yep.
And was there 2014 feels really early for me to have somebody realize that. What was it that you were reading, or who were you talking to that highlighted this for you?
No, like, okay, so it wasn't anyone in particular that highlighted it. It was looking holistically at like at a packaged wine and understanding that each segment in the, you know, in the life cycle of the wine is having an impact. I've been looking at packaging since I'm a kid. Like I was one of those crazy kids in the 70s that was like yelling at my parents for not recycling, right? Like, so I've always looked at this. You're 100% right that it wasn't part of like the mainstream conversation packaging at that time, but absolutely it was part of a conversation in other parts of the world and in various studies. So, I mean, I have always looked to the Nordics actually, you know, as sort of definitely beacons for sustainability. And so at that time, I mean, there have been studies conducted by the Nordic countries and stuff on this particular topic. That's where you could pretty much like with a click of a, you know, Google search and a click of a button, see that, okay, wow, this is actually like a crazy issue. And then, you know, I went on to continue to, you know, peel the layers away at this and studied it independently for my MW research project. And that started that like dig in research, like I really want to become an expert on this, started in, I guess, 2018, 2019. I mean, I was still like doing the behavior by producing the box wine because I knew it was the packaging type that had the lowest carbon footprint and generated the least amount of waste. But it wasn't until like later that I started to conduct the research. And it's interesting because since then it's become more a part of the conversation. I'd like to think that some of what I've had to say and, you know, my evangelism has had something to do with that, but it's more a part of the conversation now, which is awesome.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, I think it was actually a tweet from Jancis Robinson in like 2019 or 2020 where she shared just the graphic that the California Sustainable Wine Growing Alliance had produced in their 2011 report on the carbon footprint of California wine, which showed that packaging was such a big piece that for me, like I had known obviously that packaging was a piece of it, but I think if I had tried to put numbers to how big was that compared to how big was how you were farming in the vineyard compared to how big was what your processes were in the winery, like I would not have known really how to weight those different things. And it was a huge eye opener for me. And, you know, I mean, we've talked about this. This is what started us on our journey towards producing our first boxes. But I'd love to talk a little bit about that paper that you wrote for your MW. And I don't think maybe people might not know like the rigor and the extent to which these research papers have to be done. It is the single most rigorous thing that happens in any of the wine certification programs. So you want to talk about your own paper, and if you can kind of do a synopsis of some of the conclusions that you found?
Sure. So yes, it's rigorous, and it's funny. To the Master of Wine, the process to become a Master of Wine, there's so much attention focused on the blind tasting portion, which I'm not going to say that was easy, but this third stage of the program is absolutely not to be underestimated. But in many ways, maybe the most interesting, because you do get to select something and go really, really deep and have develop a level of expertise, which for me was actually really fun in spite of the challenges. But I chose a topic related to the environmental impact of packaging, obviously. I think one of the biggest challenges for me was that I was conducting this research in the middle of COVID, and there was a survey component to the research. And so it made it a lot harder just to access people and get responses to my survey in this time of crisis. But that being said, I got it done. The survey component, so the research paper essentially wanted to understand whether or not retailers in New York City specifically, or well, in New York overall actually, but with a focus on New York City, could make their purchasing decisions based on the environmental impact of the packaging. So it was really like initiating this conversation. Is this even something that buyers are considering? I think it's pretty obvious that the answer would have been no at the time. But what was really interesting was the survey went even deeper into understanding, okay, well, like what would make you think about this as a factor in your purchasing decisions? And there was a lot of really great data that I procured from the research process that's really helped me to understand how to approach this challenge, because it really is a challenge. It's so fascinating when you're like under it and in it, and you kind of know what we know. It's like really, because something was historically stigmatized as being cheap and crappy. Now that you know what you know, like you're still gonna stick with the glass bottle, but it's old habits die hard, and especially in this industry. I think you'll probably agree that, in terms of just, if there's a spectrum of industries and their propensity to be like open-minded and forward-thinking and early adopters, like the wine industry isn't one of them. So it's been actually like a really cool challenge to have gone through that process of, researching this for a couple of years, getting a lot of really great data, and now putting it to action. Yeah.
And I think there are a couple things which lead wine to being maybe a little slower to change than others. I mean, one of them is that it is this kind of tradition-bound beverage that people look at going back. Like in some cases, there are people who trace the lineage of their families going back to doing this for hundreds of years. I think part of it is that you've only got one shot a year. It's not like making beer where if something goes wrong, like 2 weeks later, great, you just make a new batch. Like you've only got one shot a year, which leads to this sort of like innate conservatism. I don't mean politically, but just in terms of decision making. And then you've got all of these middlemen. So you've got the whole distribution and retail tier who, like, even if they believe something, they need to be convinced that they can communicate this to their customers, who can communicate this to their customers in some cases, and it'll all work. So you've got lots of people who can, just because they're not convinced that this can all happen, can put the brakes on change.
I think that's really well put. And I think one of the most powerful things that I learned coming out of the research was the fact that, in the midst of this complicated 3-tier system that we embody, we each tier in the system has a tremendous amount of power for different reasons, but everybody wants to be like, oh, well, if they're doing it, then we'll do it, so to speak, and not, it's kind of like, well, we're waiting for them. And all of the tiers really want there to be consumer demand before they're willing to actually really push for a change. And to your point, from a producer standpoint, it's, yeah, you only have one shot. There's a risk, that you may or may not feel comfortable taking if that demand isn't instantly there. So it is in terms of some group actually initiating that change, it gets complicated because everyone's kind of like, oh, like we're waiting for someone else. What's I think cool though is that I do think that as a producer, you do hold way more power than maybe you want to realize, even, possibly more so than even the other tiers, certainly producers that have a reputation and are recognized. And the reason that I think that that's the case is, I mean, I'm sure this has been your experience too, the majority of wine consumers are red or white. It's, that is what we're up against. And many of them are absolutely happy to drink what we tell them to drink. They're cool with that. It's like, if there's a big end cap and it's saying like, drink me or whatever, like, they're like, okay, cool. There's so much, room for us to be influencing in a positive way. And that's why at this juncture, I'm really trying to mobilize to have us all be like, look, it is 100% okay to be drinking wine in all sorts of vessels, and to empower consumers ultimately to be making decisions that align with their value systems. There are a lot of consumers out there that care tremendously about the environment, that are making their purchases based on environmental considerations. Many of them are just like, us a couple years ago, only are thinking about the farming, organic, this and that. They don't have a clue of the impact of that glass bottle. And if they did know it, and they did know that there was an alternative with, equivalent quality wine in a style that they enjoy, and they knew all the other benefits like the extended shelf life, less waste, better value for money, all the things, that they'd be like all in. But we do have to lead in that space. We really do.
That is 100% in keeping with our experience since we launched our own boxes last year, where it's like, okay, we're going to make 324 boxes the first time. Like, I hope they sell out in a month. We're just going to market this to our mailing list. Then, of course, like, we announced it sold out in 4 hours, and I got to spend the next week responding to disappointed wine club members being like, man, I wasn't at my computer. I didn't have a chance to order, and then it was gone. Like, I am a real believer that if you have a relationship with your customers, and we have 40,000 people on our mailing list, we have 11,000 wine club members. Like, if you have that relationship and you can communicate with them directly, like, they're willing to listen to you and try stuff they haven't tried before.
100%. Yep.
It's just that, I think we are in a relatively unusual and somewhat privileged position in that we do have that broad a reach to our customers. It's a lot harder if you're a producer in Italy, where like it's getting put into a package and being sent across an ocean, and then you have to trust the rest of the distribution channel to make it all work. Which is why I think what you're doing is so important and so impressive.
Thank you. No, I think it's the same. We're applying the same process, right? Like, you have your customer base, and so do I. And ultimately, if you hear from me, you're buying my box wine. Do you know what I mean? But like, that's, it's still, it's you and your mailing list. It's me and my mailing list, essentially. But my fantasy is that, as an industry, we can at least just open our minds to the fact that it doesn't, encouraging acceptance of alternatives to single-use glass for everyday wine is not going to in any way eradicate tradition. It's not going to mean that we would relegate like long-term oak-aged wines to this format or anything like that. It's just opening up the space for wines that fit well into this context, and doing so because it would take a lot of, if there could be more broader acceptance and broader adoption, it would take a lot of single-use glass out of the landfill, you know, and it really would have an impact. And I hear all the time, oh, we're just the wine industry and like other industries should do it and this and that. And it's like, we are so past the point of being like, oh, that other bigger industry that's having more of an impact should be, you know, the one that should be responsible. We all need to be responsible every day with every little action that we take. So that's where I'm at. Yeah.
And we have an opportunity. I mean, in that wine is a product that that I think in general people do have a lot of loyalty to a producer, to sometimes to a retailer, to the places that they buy from, and so you have the ability to communicate things that are important. And along those lines, I mean, just a couple months ago, you organized kind of a communal tasting event in Brooklyn dedicated to kind of eco-conscious and particularly eco-conscious packaging.
Correct.
Can you talk a little bit about that and how it went?
Sure. It went great, I guess. It was the first of its kind event. So the fact that it actually went, it was hosted at this very cool sustainably minded plant shop in Williamsburg that's completely off the grid. You know, to really be, you know, showing idealistic behaviors across the board. And it was outdoors and it was pouring with rain that day. So all of that considered, it was like amazing that it turned out the way that it did. But the intention behind the event was really to illustrate that, you know, wine in any format, particularly box wine, can be, you know, an awesome consuming experience. It can be fun. So it was an opportunity to collaborate with my peers that are, you know, on the same page with respect to pushing box wine for the low carbon footprint and the least amount of waste and producing high quality examples. And it was an opportunity to
I don't know if there's something that popped up on your end. I've lost your audio. So, I just lost your audio. Can you hear me? I don't know if there's something that popped up or a call, or usually it happens because a call or something tries to come through and that sort of short circuits it. Okay. So if you can't hear me and I can't hear you, maybe exit out and rejoin.
There we are. I can
hear
you now. Great.
Excellent.
I don't know what happened.
It's usually when some sort of another application tries to jump in, like a call or something comes in, and all of a sudden Instagram decides that that's more important than maintaining the connection to the audio. But
Understood.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Oh gosh. So I don't know. Did I just talk and no one heard?
I think so. That's from the couple of comments that I got. It sounded like your last question, which was basically, I think, just talking about the kind of take-home lessons from the event in September.
Great. So the take-home lessons were that it's really awesome to be collaborating with this effort, right? Like, so all the other producers that are producing higher quality box wine, it was awesome for us to all be together, and not only sharing ideas, but like together being like, look at all these awesome box wines, because it was so cool to see, you know, everything that's available on the market that's often not as accessible as it should be. And it was also great as an educational opportunity. There was a climate talk hosted by Porto Protocol as part of the event, and it was a really great Q&A. And so much of, and this goes beyond wine, so much of people's not necessarily making the most sustainable choice is just not knowing what is the most sustainable choice. And so it was a great way to educate on the topic and answer a lot of really awesome questions as to, why the plastic, the plastic bag and all these things that people think are, the factors for determining the eco-consciousness were covered in great depth, and it was a great educational opportunity. So,
Awesome.
yeah, it was awesome. We're going to do it again.
Great. I look forward to actually having enough wine to have it make sense to participate next time.
Awesome. That's great.
Okay, I have one more real question for you.
Sure.
Though again, I could sit here and have this chat all afternoon with great pleasure. But I know I read somewhere that you were a part of one of the bottle reuse plans that have been trying to get up off the ground. And I had Karen McNamara from Conscious Container as a guest on this conversation maybe 6 months ago. And I had Morgan McLaughlin, who's the head of the Willamette Valley Winery Association, and they're working with Ravino to try their own bottle reuse. And I'm just curious, do you feel like that is a viable part of wine's future, figuring out some way of reusing glass bottles, or do you think that the logistical hurdles in the way of that, which are significant, are going to make it really hard to achieve that?
So I think it absolutely needs to be a part of the plan as well. I was the director of wine at a company called Good Goods, which was really, what Revino is doing today is what Good Goods was essentially trying to do. Good Goods didn't get the funding that it needed, so that's why it wasn't able to continue, as an organization. But I'm still piloting bottle reuse every day. I have a couple of wines that I have dedicated to reuse programs. I'm doing it on a really small scale, on premise only. It's a long way of saying it absolutely, despite all of the logistical hurdles that you point out, it's crazy to me that the bottle, which is absolutely something that is reusable a number of times, is actually going into the trash. And there are so many things like that, I'm sure, in our daily lives that we recognize. This morning, my son was like, "You're not going to throw that away, are you?" It was the big container of the protein powder, because I'm a runner and we put it in smoothies and this and that. And I was like, "No, I'm not." And then I was like, "What am I going to do with this?" And then I'm using it in my laundry room now, because when I'm diluting the borax or whatever I'm doing, it's this container with the scoop. I was like, see, there it is. But nothing actually needs to be waste, and certainly not a glass bottle, because it's durable and all the things. So I'm all about it, but it's going to require it's basically any circular economy, and I'm deep into this as well. It's another one of my side projects, to actually develop a circular economy for anything, including wine. It's a new industry. It's a totally new industry with a totally new infrastructure. And so to actually achieve that in an economically sustainable way is going to take a lot of time. So but you got to start it now, right? So I invested in that. Box wine is instant gratification. It's the easy thing that's there. You have to overcome stigma and perception. And so there's that challenge, and it's not an easy one, but at least it can actually be executed and be done. The bottle reuse, we're doing it, but the scale is so small. It's insignificant because we don't have the infrastructure yet, but we should still keep paying attention to this and collaborating in that space too, because one of the biggest things that I've learned about any of these initiatives is everything is so fragmented, and so little can get done in a fragmented environment. And once you start bringing people together, you can not only share ideas, but you can share resources, and you can actually start getting stuff done.
That's, I think, one of the exciting promises of organizations like the Porto Protocol, where they're basically all about bringing people together who
Correct.
may be thinking about this on their own island.
Correct. And they're solutions oriented, which is amazing. And it's all about sharing solutions and creating a network where we have access to the folks that we need to tap into to actually start executing some of these solutions. So it's awesome.
Excellent. Cool. Okay. So if people want to learn more about you or learn more about communal brands, what's the best way for them to do that?
I mean, you can just reach out to me. There's obviously Communal Brands has a website and an Instagram with my contact information. My I guess like alter ego is Wine Queen. That's where I do a lot of my sustainable initiatives. I call myself a wine queen, not because I think I'm so regal, but when I was studying for the Master of Wine, my kids were really small because it took that long. They're not so small anymore. And my daughter was like, "What are you doing, Mommy?" And I explained, and she's like, "Oh, you're trying to become a wine queen." And I was like, "Yeah." And so it stuck. So when I became a Master of Wine, and I like kind of have been doing, yeah. So winequeen.com also exists. And that's where you can get more information about some of my sustainability initiatives. And yeah, just reach out to me.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you so much for taking a chunk out of your Wednesday afternoon to talk through all this and introduce your work to people who maybe didn't know it yet. I look forward to our paths crossing in person sooner than later.
Same, Jason. Thank you so much for having me, and we will definitely be in touch.
Awesome.
All right.
Excellent. Well, Tablas Creek folks, thank you. I will see you again in 2 weeks. My guest in 2 weeks is going to be Tegan Pasalacqua, the winemaker for Turley and his own project Sandlands, doing all kinds of stuff, particularly with dry farmed vineyards. So join in 2 weeks. Meanwhile, have a lovely Thanksgiving. And thank you again, Melissa, for joining, being a part of it.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay.
See ya.
Bye, everybody.